Hello, it's Laurie, or Blockchain Brad, and today we're speaking with Sebastian, who is the founder of DePay. Seb, thank you very much for making time for this free interview to learn everything that you stand for and what you are currently building.
Thank you, Brad. Nice to be here.
Likewise, mate. And for those who want to deep dive, this is the time and the place for you right now. This is entirely free, and there's no other premise but to learn about exactly what these teams are building. Today, it's all about payment protocols. It's about building products. It's about building an ecosystem that essentially can really represent DeFi in a very progressive and modern way. So let's start with that. Let's roll up the sleeves, Seb, and let's go. DeFi simplifies and improves your crypto payments. That's pretty general, but the question is, how do you differ? How do you differentiate? And how do you do this with DeFi?
So what we're doing is we simplify payments by allowing everybody to liquidate or to use all kinds of assets that he potentially has in his or her wallet at the point of payment by using existing DeFi protocols we built based on top of them. And that allows us to enable people to use all kinds of different assets that they have in their wallet to perform payments at the point of payment.
Okay, so it's interesting. You mentioned that you utilize the best of blockchain, or you nuance that. So would that mean that you use the best of what's already out there? And if that's the case, what is that?
From a blockchain perspective, you mean, or from an asset perspective?
Let's start with blockchain, because obviously right now it's a hot topic, and we've seen that even the crypto space has been set on fire with the likes of Elon and Tesla and all kinds of things going on. So what does it mean though to have that tech stack from the outset that you can literally trust in a trustless way in terms of its quality?
So from a blockchain perspective and from a technology perspective, or general in the space, the same applies to us. We've went with Ethereum first for a reason of maturity, mainly because it's just so, if you think of interoperability or like being enabled to build is crucial for an open space. It's like DeFi or blockchains in general. It's so important for talent and for devs to be enabled to just start building without a lot of friction. And Ethereum made and still makes a great job and providing all the tools at hand that you need to start building on blockchain tech.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because if you're someone representing an entity, which you are as the founder, you're also trying to really represent the protocol, which is a decentralized contribution, the open source nature of this. You want to be flexible, I would imagine, as this innovation we call blockchains emerge, and you want to be part of that arguably as your products emerge. So how do you navigate through all of the speed of innovation that's happening now, Seb, given that you started and you paid attention with Ethereum, and we know that the network effects are there, but also the devs, but what's coming? What do you foresee for DePay in this context?
It's actually very challenging to keep up with the evolution that happens in that space all around different, not only different blockchains, but all the existing ones. They also innovate a lot, so they actually try to keep up with the innovation in regards of just growing in the sense of it being simple to build on them too. And that finally all is going to lead to what we're seeing and what we're going to see even more when it comes to inter-blockchain integration. So we actually allocate some of our time to actually research and explore how we are going to grow our payment protocol, not only onto other chains. Let me name some that we're going to start with when it comes to our expansion strategy. It's going to be Binance Smart Chain being one of the first that we're going to extend in addition to Ethereum. And then from there on, we get very quickly going to extend to Polkadot too from an inter-blockchain perspective. But there's also Cosmos and Quant that we're also going to tap on over the next couple of months for sure.
Okay, it's interesting you said in that order as well. You don't usually get that, especially coming from the dev circle and sphere. Often current narratives are predominantly Ethereum across to Polkadot, across to Cosmos, and then perhaps from there we start discussing things like the BSC. So why Binance, straight after Ethereum? Why not go across to where all the parachain work's being done with parity, etc.?
This might have a technical drive, because from a tech perspective, you always try to resolve and reach low-hanging fruits, as you call them, and stuff that is as close as to the tech that you started building on is usually easier to migrate to or to extend to. So Binance Smart Chain is also, like, from a tech perspective, very close to Ethereum, from the architecture, from the design, from how you need to code there to write protocols. So that's one of the reasons why we're gonna move there too. It also has a strategic aspect from the token perspective, because we want to be known more in like just the Binance tribe for potential decentralized listing on Binance too, because like at least the stuff that they try to attempt with their decentralized exchange somehow goes into the direction of what we believe in. So that also has a strategic reason why we're gonna extend to Binance Smart Chain as one of the first chains, additional chains.
It's super smart, and as you mentioned, they do have their DEX there as well, and that needs more trial, many would say, when trials with regard to uptake and experimentation. And you're very, very much in the realm of pro DEX, entirely DEX, support as well, given that you're supporting that narrative of DeFi very strongly with your products, especially with your protocol, rather. Now, one of the things I wanted to just go back and sort of extrapolate a little bit more was the problem. Essentially, there's no value really in any new startup unless there is a real problem to solve and a real need as well. So in the context of marketplace, in the context of economies, and even just the potential of this as a business, what was the problem, and why are you a very fitting solution for the problem?
I think I will describe that problem with my very own experience that I had when I had this intense phase getting into the space. I think everybody has that, right? At some way you get hooked, or you start following the white rabbit, and then you have this intense time of exploring what this is that you just discovered and found. And during that time for me, going through the space and start interacting with the apps and see what you can do, there was always this point with every single app or website that is in the space and allows you to interact with blockchains, with crypto, however you want to call that, which felt tedious to me from a user experience perspective, because my personal background is I'm a computer scientist and I studied interaction design. So I always look at things also from a simplicity perspective. If it's not simple to use, or if the experience doesn't feel right, for me, it can be.
So your problem was the UX UI essentially of pre-existing models.
Exactly, like the pure fact that up until now the average DApp website only accepts one asset type as payment. That's usually the case. Even let it be Ethereum. The problem is that the average user has so many different crypto assets in his wallet per default. Often Ethereum is the last one that he has available in theory, because usually when you come to the space, you get Ethereum and then you start distributing things.
That's true.
So often the idea from Ethereum in theory that you can use it to transfer value is true. We see that for trading and like moving value around, but for payments in the end, it's tricky. And it's from a technical perspective, it's even said that transferring Ether is the most cost optimized thing on Ethereum, because people don't want to move their Ether necessarily. They have a lot of other assets that they might want to move.
Especially when we're looking at staking as well, because now with that built in with the development of the POS, you can clearly see why people don't want to necessarily always just use it.
Yeah, but they have a lot of other very liquid assets. I mean, in general, crypto and blockchains, it's amazing how liquid all of those assets are. If you compare that to classic things, like nobody is standing in line at the grocery shop and thinking like, should I sell 1% of my Tesla holdings now in order to pay for this milk? Like nobody is ever having that thought, not because they couldn't, it's because, or not because they wouldn't think about that, it's because they couldn't. There's no way to just stand there at the counter, it's like, click, oh, I just paid with 1% of my Tesla holding.
Yes, and you raise an interesting question, because as soon as we start talking about payments, and this is going to come up later in the interview, we start to question, where is that contextualize in the discussion of money? Where does it fit in the question of utility? And we've talked also in pre-interview about perhaps the reformulation of the terminology, reassessing exactly how all these things fit, because maybe the terms don't quite now.
Yes, in the end, it's all about transfer of value. It's like this discussion around the terminology of money is tricky, and usually leads to endless discussions too, because there are certain edge cases and definitions of how people see it differently.
Yeah, it's true. And you could get into the discussion deeply about this, which we will just touch on in terms of the challenges of regulation later on. Now, what about with regard to the global nature of this? Let's dig into DeFi, peer-to-peer, those value propositions, because they would relate also arguably to the problem that you're trying to solve.
Totally. One of the main narratives of blockchain, or in the crypto space in general, is cutting off middlemen. And if you think about it, especially in the recent past, this has been entirely true for payment processing. Like if you look at, for example, what happened to Pornhub being cut off of Visa and MasterCard, it's just a good example. It just proves that this entire idea of potentially being able to cutting out middlemen in this entire industry or technology from a revolutionary perspective, it also applies for the sector that we're in. Like long-term, people don't want to have custodians in the middle that do process their payments for convenience. They want to have the convenience, but they don't want to have the middleman. That's exactly where facilitating different technologies and DeFi allows you to achieve the same thing peer-to-peer.
Yes, and we've seen even with the likes of WikiLeaks, without getting political, we've also seen the reactions swiftly from the top down to try and again remove some of those, conduits to cash or conduits to support that he needed. Now, what do you do in that context when you're trying to build a business, but you're also trying to espouse decentralization as a very strong value proposition? How do you manage this from protocol to product?
Can you repeat that?
Well, just in the context of you're trying to build out your products, you're building out your business of DePay, and you're also trying to advocate for the open source nature of your protocol, the payment protocol itself. So how do you work through this in that your agenda is clearly, as you discussed, about decentralized, offerings, making sure we circumvent those middlemen, but you're also trying to build out specific units of value as an independent company.
Yes.
So how do you manage these two interesting interplays?
I think it comes from the fact that you can't decentralize everything. It's simply not possible. Like, I'm not sure if the technology at some point is going to evolve as much that really everything is possible in a decentralized way. And it already starts with sending an email. You just can't send an email in a decentralized way. Maybe at some point we're going to have protocols that are going to replace emails altogether. But until we're there, you just can't send an email. And it's sending, for example, an email confirmation with a bill of what you paid for is such a common thing, and it's from an expectation perspective, from a common user talking about user experience. Again, people just expect that in a lot of interactions with merchants or shops or purchasing and payments in general. They kind of often expect a payment confirmation or a bill in return per email. And it's a really good example for it's just impossible to build in a decentralized way. And that's an example for all those things that we want to offer to raise the experience for payments in the decentralized web. All the stuff that is only doable on a centralized perspective, that's what we host or protect or drive as a company, which all those tools are always going to sit on top of the stuff that is free to use, decentralized, open protocols. And then there's going to be the stuff on top that does the job for the things that are currently not possible to build in a decentralized way.
Right. Well, let's discuss the global economy for a moment, because this is so relevant for payment protocols in terms of market share. Right now, can you just paint us a picture with all the research your team would have had to do to understand that was there a market fit for this? Clearly, there's a huge industry in the payments industry, making sure that obviously the banks and all those services capitalize on fees and that sort of thing. So how do you evolve and how do you take some of that market share in this context of the global economy?
I think the best way try to start to grasp this is if you make a direct comparison to Stripe. Like they kind of revolutionized. They were the last ones who made a big step in revolutionizing or pushing forward the payment from a technology perspective and from an evolutionary perspective. And if you put it in perspective in numbers, I think the last evaluation was like 32 billions, I think was the last evaluation that they had from company perspective.
Wow.
And they were also deemed the narrative was also that they're going to replace the banks entirely because they just didn't catch up with the experience. And that's such a problem in general with legacy technology because it's just getting replaced so quickly.
Well, let's talk about this because, sorry, my apologies. My wife just arrived. Our dog's barking. But I wanted to ask you about the continuum from traditional banking right across to where we're our discussion now with DePay, because in between that we see Stripe, and you mentioned that. And I wanted to sort of break this down a little bit more because the market share for the mainstream right now with regard to payments is very significant, far beyond anything the likes of Stripe. But then you mentioned the vast growth that Stripe's had in trying to sort of tinker with the technology that's emerging now. So when we talk about global economies, we're talking trillions in this side, then we're talking about Stripe, and then you are just emerging. So how do you fit in the continuum? What do you foresee for DePay? Can you take over more of these market shares? And how do you differ, as well said, from Stripe?
Yes. So how I see it personally when it comes to evolution, especially in the tech space, and you see the history, it's always that in the beginning of those different industries emerging, even banking, you always have this phase in the first 1 to 2 years where you lock yourself into the direction. You become a huge ship, right? That's true for all projects, especially in the tech space. No matter if it's a bank that built the standard protocols to transfer money across different countries with SEPA or all that standard technologies that they have, you lock yourself in, and then you're a big, huge ship because you built those huge industry around it. You can't navigate that ship anymore. It's already like on open sea. You can't navigate the course anymore. It's just that. It's by nature of how big industries work. And Stripe, in theory, is already left the harbor. They did a very good job at the time when they started to launch a ship that takes the journey, but they already left the harbor. So it's for them, it's going to be very tricky to navigate that ship around into another direction, which is the crypto space, because they just didn't consider that when they started building the ship. So their ship is not prepared to navigate that course. Whereas we are still in the harbor, building the ship, totally around crypto and decentralization. And then once we launch the ship, we're gonna, in the next 4 or 5 years, we're also gonna run into that issue that we, at some point, we're not gonna be able to navigate that ship into the direction of things that come in. It's gonna happen after blockchains.
I love the fact that you just said, 4 or 5 years from now. So clearly you have a very long-term view, and also your token model, your distribution model certainly reflects that. And no doubt, even with the team, in the way that you wouldn't have had access to a lot of the tokens that fuel this utility system for the very long period of time, which we'll get to. But again, going back to Stripe, now, if we talk about clear competitors, perhaps there really isn't the best example even with Stripe, because you mentioned that we're adding more technology. We're innovating with the likes of DePay, with the addition of that utility fuel we call crypto. So if we went and did a comparative analysis in the context of blockchain based payment protocols now, would we see anything like you beyond the likes of Stripe, which already shown that it can really capture the imagination, the market share of the legacy models? Now what's possible, and are you paying attention to what else is being done outside of the scope of DePay, even when it comes to centralized entities out there with the likes of Coinbase or Binance, for example?
If we are aware of what they're doing, or...
Well, so, I mean, are you paying attention to it as you're building?
Yeah, sure, totally. Like sometimes even those teams start reaching out to us. Like we just had like a connection with a Binance product team the other day, because they launched a payment product just like weeks ago in order to allow people to spend the assets that they have in their Binance wallets anyway, spend them as part of payment transactions, which is a very good idea for a closed-in system like Binance, because you try to keep as much of these assets that are on your platform and keep them in there, right? You don't want, it's literally describing the issue of, it just drives our narrative, because people want to liquidate their assets at times, Binance being the perfect example. And you need to make that simple for people, because in the end, they're gonna liquidate. And if it's not simple for them, for the users, they're gonna put their assets somewhere else where it is simple, because the entire industry and the entire technology allows you to liquidate stuff so quickly. Hence, people are making use of that fact that you can do that.
Right. So there could be some collaboration between potentially the BSC or some of the product tinkering that the Binance and the Binance tool suite's offering. But are there any other competitors that you foresee challenging the potentials of DeFi as you move out, or are you just not focused on what other entities are doing and just building out potentially one of the first to capture specifically the payment potential of the in this market of payment protocols and the products you're building?
From time to market, we have been in the perfect spot, because as you might know, the entire decentralized exchange hype or growth really just kicked off like in September last year. It's really when it was like crazy, right?
Uniswap ignited everything.
Exactly, and that was exactly the time when we started building. So from an opportunity perspective, from a time window, we have been the first movers, definitely. I definitely believe there's competition coming. I'm not fearing the one that has been around before the DeFi, really not, because I just see what's possible to build on top of that. They just still need to explore that, like competition that had been before. They already all have their ship launched, so for them it's going to take some time for them to catch up in the first place. But everything that comes after us is the stuff that we actually need to look out. And in this space, that actually happens naturally. You've seen what happened with SushiSwap, and we focus not about, or we're not afraid of what's coming in regards of competition. Well, we're very like self-confident when it comes to being capable to innovate, because we're still building a ship, right? That's going to change once that's launched, as I described.
Right.
But when it comes to research and being prepared to get this, and competition is good because it drives this own motivation to excel. So that's how we see it. So if there's something going to come up along the journey that is going to potentially have a little bit better ideas, we will try to see it as motivator to do even better.
And also, given the magnitude of the economy that you're potentially going to thwart and challenge and perhaps even overcome in the future, there's so much scope and potential for many different protocols to emerge and still have an abundance there for challenging the status quo and legacy systems by and large. Now, one of the things I also wanted to ask you about was the team itself, because you mentioned before that you started last year, really going for this. And often right now in this bull run, we're in that interval run period now, in many different protocols emerge, all kinds of very creative teams emerge as well. And often there's white papers presented or ideas. Now, you don't come across, Seb, like that to me. You come across like you are dev-centric, you are really focused on real protocols from the outset, real products that you're building before you come to market or even showcase to the public what the utility token can really do. So can you comment on that a bit more? The proof that you built first, you started with the agenda of real and just coded in.
Yes, I mean, a lot of that was situational, but it also worked perfectly with our idea of a fair launch from a token perspective. I mean, fair launch is a huge discussion when it comes to tokenomics. And by building the first version first at the Hackathon ETH Global in October, and even having launched the token before that, for us, that was like the best idea when it comes to fair launch, because people were free to decide if they believe in that or not. Because what you often see usually is that you have like a first big investor. So the team usually tries to reach out to investors in order to finance the time up until the first MVP or beta, or whatever you ever want to call that. Usually you need to get that financed. And that's where you hand over a big part of the token stake already to the pre-seed investors, and that's usually the ones that are gonna like sell off. They're usually the first ones that are gonna sell off. And from a fair launch perspective, that never really was what we wanted. That's also why we took the opportunity from the hackathon and went through this intense time of building a beta version of the payment widget or our payment product, or the entire stack, however you want to call that. And that was the surroundings leading to us performing those steps that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's all kinds of sentiment around the term fair launch. Some argue they're very pro pre-existing terminology in the way it's explained. Some are saying we need to really build upon this and experiment further. But it is interesting that you have attempted to move beyond the challenge of VC, well, I don't like to use the term VC because it's an overused term, but capital firms dumping, because their agenda is the capital itself and the profit. So talk us through a little bit more of that, because that's relevant for us for understanding you are utility focused because you want that token in use. How did that process go? Exactly what happened to make sure that there was a fairer sort of underbelly? There was a fairer and very systemic approach to making sure that we can see transparently that this is a true utility token.
I mean, first of all, it's almost impossible to have 100% fair launch, simply because you always going to have information asymmetry, and that's part of the, let's say, game. That's part of, you will never be able to change the fact that information reaches people at different times. So if you think about the perfect fair launch, it's a launch where only the aspect of time and you being potentially capable to arrive at information to get that token, and the time that it takes you to make that decision, those should only be the only factors that should matter when it comes to this entire discussion about a fair launch.
Mm-hmm. And did that happen with DePay, where, for example, I've mentioned this also with regard to some of the liquidity mining tokens, is that yes, there's the question of fair launch there, but perhaps there was also a scenario where in some instances, many of the major stakeholders in crypto were preparing, really eager to participate in that open environment where it was egalitarian, arguably, and anyone could access it. But when you have prep, when you have an understanding of what's coming, or when you are, in the know, let's say, in the crypto world, is that fair as well? So how did you navigate all of that when, firstly, you didn't have the platform of some of these liquidity mining assets that came out, and you're still relatively unknown, and we need to change that for something like you. But how do you, again, make sure at launch that it's really just first in, first served based on the agenda of what it's intended for, not just for early incentives to capitalize for a short period of time?
Yes. To explain that, I don't think that projects that start with liquidity mining from the get-go are fair launches, because it puts capital over, like the benefit is, if the more capital you have, the more you can withdraw from that launch. I'm not 100% sure, that's true from buying from open market too, but I have the feeling that's applies even more on liquidity mining. Fair launch perspective, I love what Uniswap started with the airdrops to actual users, and everybody's continuing to do that. Just the latest example with Tornado Cash. The part that I personally and we as a team find unfair in regards of how they're executing it is that you don't know if and when that happens. That's also something as part of our tokenomics, is that it's actually already pre-announced. We already outline that we're going to do something very similar. We call that the early adapter program. Mm-hmm. And just so people talking about information asymmetry again, it's actually, they kind of play with the fact that people potentially speculate and assume if they potentially airdrop something or not. People were discussing if they should create 100 wallets now and interact with every single protocol that's out there just to potentially gain from airdrops. So when it comes to how those projects airdrop tokens for early users, because those in the end are always the early adapters are always the one who kind of, well, help you grow, especially in the beginning. So that's something that we also incorporate into our tokenomics, is the early adapter program. Coming back to how we managed to launch the way that we did is literally, and you know that from classical startups too, is put our own resources in regards of liquidity into the pair. So instead of relying on the community entirely from the get-go, which you usually do with liquidity mining, where you just start the liquidity pool and there are no tokens and people need to start to mine them, and then you build the narrative about having the first people start mining them. We just put a lot of our own liquidity, as from a team perspective, also to prove that we believe in that stuff ourselves. Typically, what you also see in classical startups, if the team is not invested itself, it's usually like a sign for other investors to like, well, if you didn't invest any of your money, why should we do that?
Exactly, and we see that with the lockup as well, which is substantially, substantial period of time, which is important to note for confidence for those who want to participate in the utility and support the development of your products as well. So congratulations on that team bootstrapping, because again, you really hit the nail on the head with the comparison of liquidity mining. That's outsourced liquidity. Yours was in-house liquidity, showcasing your long-term commitment and risk as well. So you went through that. Congratulations for the achievement in that thus far. Now let's pull it back again to what's really important, and that is your protocol. Now you offer a whole lot of products built in on top of that tech stack, but feel free to comment from protocol up. If we really went in and we had a look at all the different offerings that you've built so far, and this is just the beginning, what are you most excited about, and how would you explain, what you've done in terms of a full package?
Yes. So from a protocol perspective, we kind of built at that time where 1inch started to become a standard or a big thing from a tech standard, right? This entire aggregation layer, or the fact that you, from an interoperability perspective, that you actually need to start to connect the dots is very important when you build on DeFi. You need to start connect dots. You're not going to survive if you just build at the lowest level. This is the same thing with the internet. At some point, you need to leave the current layer, and DeFi kind of grew as a layer from a tech perspective already very big. And now it's time to actually connect the dots in that layer, building the next layer. And 1inch is a perfect example of doing that. And we're very similar to what they're doing too, with the big difference that we're focusing on payments while they're focusing on trades. Again, the entire narrative with the ship applies. So their ship is already sailed, so they're always going to be focused on trades, whereas we're always going to be focused on payments. While we will try to tap into classic like trading experiences, they might try to tap into classic payment experience and vice versa, just from a different.
Okay, so aggregators are really important in that sense as well, as part of the dot connectors, as you're sort of alluding to. So yeah, let's explore though a little bit more of the products, because it's one thing to have that protocol, and that can evolve as needed be to really, fire exactly what you need to achieve, exactly, or just really to continue to support. That's really what the protocol does, supports everything on top of that. So what's exciting, what differentiates you in the business side of it, which is everything on top of the protocol?
Just to quickly finish, what excites me the most in the protocol is actually the composability and the interoperability, something that we didn't manage to build at the hackathon, but we managed to build it like throughout the 3 months between the hackathon and now, because it's just 3 months between the hackathon and now. And the protocol actually supports to now not only grow in regards of additional and future decentralized exchanges, but also functionality can be added to the payment experience or to the payment protocol itself without changing the protocol itself, which otherwise would come with user experience downsides. Like think of token approvals. If you change to a different smart contract, or you upgrade the smart contract to a different address, then you go through the entire experience of having token approvals all over again, which comes with a different additional network fees that users have to pay, etc., etc. Wow. And the fact that we managed to build a payment protocol in a way where you can interact with what we call plugins and you can kind of select when you process a payment with that protocol. You can select the amount or the plugins that you want to use and the sequence of how you use them. And to give you an example, usually the classic example is you take one DEX plugin, could be Uniswap or Muniswap or Sushi, and that swaps the asset of your choice. And then you have a plugin that transfers the money to the receiver. That's one combination of a plugin. Another one that we already kind of built already is that a plugin that allows you to have smart contracts becoming the receivers of that money. Because classically you have the sender receiver experience where you send something to somebody else, but you also have this experience where you send assets into a smart contract. Staking pools and liquidity pools being the best example. In theory, they can be considered a payment transaction or interaction. I have some assets and I like paying them into the pool in order to get to fulfill a utility or to interact with a smart contract. So another good example for our plugins is that you also can chain a smart contract call at the end of that payment process, where then you just swap asset and you transfer and call a different smart contract that executes something. And for example, that allows to take anything that you have into your wallet, and within the same transaction, you literally swap and stake it into a mining pool of your choice, in theory.
Okay. So going back to those keywords, I mean, sorry, did you want to go on?
No. I would just want to continue to answer your question, because then you asked what we're going to build on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And also I wanted to ask you, you mentioned keywords like composability. You know, that's often used in the context of DeFi and Ethereum, but very recently we're hearing a lot more of that word being used in other blockchains too. So it harks back to that potential of the multi-chain and the, I guess, the integration of other chains discussion.
Yes, and that's why we have such a unique proposition, is because we are at the forefront of that experience, because with our widgets that we're building, which are actually the first point of when it comes to the users actually interacting with that payment execution, it allows us to actually become entirely chain agnostic in the long run, because in the end we're just like this widget that devs and websites are implementing and using in order to accept more coins or a big variety of different coins, and so, using us to simplify their user experience or the user experience.
Well, Seb, let's talk about your products, because that's the exciting thing from the business angle. And also, I really would like to see you guys build revenue, and we can talk about that in that sense. But is it also fair to say, if we put your business brain on for a second, we take away the blockchain aspect, do you think it really matters fundamentally, if we look at it from a lay perspective, which blockchain you use, if we know the integrity is built in, if we know that it's performance, if we know that it's cost saving, it does all the things that you need, does it really matter to you from the business side which one it is?
For us as a company, no, because in theory, it's actually the opposite. We are incentivized to grow onto different chains, because our value proposition is that we enable as much digital assets or crypto assets, whatever you want to call that, as possible. So we are incentivized as a company to keep on growing onto different chains.
It's so interesting, because really then it breaks down the maximalist narrative immediately for you. You know, it throws it out of the equation, because it's irrelevant in the sense that, yes, we know that all the iterations happening, we know all the networks effects that are happening with Ethereum, and they really matter. But at the end of the day, if it's not going to work for you long term, let's say it doesn't, that's really a case of you just making sure you're shifting gears in a landscape to suit your needs. I'm not suggesting that Ethereum is going to be in that scenario, but it's just to make the point that you do have those differing agendas to take care and support Ethereum, but also take care of your own needs when it comes to what you need to be performant and competitive for years ahead. So let's discuss those products, because you need those to really be performant and be seamless and be easy, so that they're invisible to most users, arguably. So what do you offer to the public, you know, when they're trying to work out, do I go with DePay, do I go with Stripe, et cetera, et cetera?
So one thing that we considered or kind of wanted to achieve with our products is that the entry level is always free. Not only free, but actually the entry level of our protocols and products is open source and public goods. When it comes to products from a revenue or a company perspective, that's where DePay Pro, how we call it, comes into place. All the things that you can't build from a technical perspective in a decentralized way is hosted in this brand or this sphere that we call DePay Pro, which creates this value for businesses or like individual professionals that need a little bit more than just the
basics
are fulfilling. And to give you an example, so somebody could just come and could use the widget. He can just take it and put it on his website and start accepting crypto payments. We don't earn from that. It's a free product from that perspective, but we as a company doesn't earn from that. Where we believe the additional value kicks in when it comes to us earning as a company is with Pro. And to continue that narrative with the story, so that person that added that widget to his website, at some point he needs to make statements about how much money did I earn through that? The tax man just knocked on the door and wants to know how much money I made. And I need to start reporting of the stuff that comes through it. And the current experience would be like, you spend, I don't know, a month or two going through your Etherscan transactions and trying to figure out what the hell was going on. So that's actually what kind of Pro starts taking over and simplifies that experience from a professional and business perspective to help this demand that is there to not only have simplified payments, which is the free part, but also doing all these requirements that a business and a professional have. And there you need to pay us as a company. That's where our revenue comes in. That's where we strongly believe to create this additional centralized value, if you want to call it that way, from a company perspective.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, let's discuss where you're at currently in the roadmap in terms of runway and in terms of revenue, because you bootstrap from the beginning. You do have that your token, but also, as you said, you've got these suite of products that are essentially closed in that you've got to pay for the top stuff, which is the Pro. So what does that mean in translation when it comes to filling your coffers so that you can continue to build this for the future?
You mean as a requirement or?
Well, just the current state of this, because if you're offering this service, who's using it? What's the current situation for you as a company?
The main drive to build those solutions was due to the DeFi belief that we have. So the first milestone was to get those protocols also out there and basic products for people to use. Then the company aspect of actually making money on top with that, with Pro, requires us to be able to convince those initial users that, oh yeah, I kind of need Pro on top. So it's our challenge right now to achieve that product market fit for Pro too, because we have seen for the basic products, like people want to use them, especially because they're free. And we just need to achieve the same thing with Pro too, which comes delayed, right? If you think about it, that's just how a lot of people work. They want to make money, right? So and they just on the website. This experience of having those additional needs, that comes delayed, often half a year or a year. So that's something that we are building up right now, but we totally believe that it's going to be delayed, that this product market fit of Pro is going to actually kick in.
Right, and I appreciate so much that transparency in that answer, because you really do need to have to showcase the full suite of open source tools in your product suite, rather, so that people can experiment with them in a very free and organic way. And then the enterprise aspect of this will build arguably indirectly from the value of this, much like you see any business do this with their free products first, moving into subscription models or beyond that with payment systems. But we do want to see you have that revenue to be viable, long term. That's just one of the value add for you. Now, we talked about the blockchain. You made it clear that you're agnostic. You've made very clear sense to the logic behind it. And most importantly, you said that, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that no matter what, you're competitive in the market with the blockchains that you utilize. So in terms of advanced tech, beyond, the Pro itself, what other things do you think are really relevant when we explore the world that's being built from the devs that sets you apart?
Being agnostic is not simple. People always assume that, like with tech, when tech appears simple, it's usually very difficult. Like when we achieve to have an experience that no matter which crypto asset, no matter which blockchain, it's just going to suggest the most cost effective for you at the point of payment. You think it's simple for you, but getting there is very, very difficult. Becoming agnostic requires you to build up a lot of domain knowledge for every single integration that you're building. Well, luckily, a lot of blockchains are alike, so it's at least manageable from a complexity perspective, because you see the same patterns over and over again. That they use the same kind of designs from an architecture perspective, so it's not infinitely hard to plug in additional chains into that payment experience to reach this to arrive at that goal of making it simple for the user. Because in the end, if you think about it, crypto adoption from a technology perspective, if you compare it with the internet, people don't need to know what HTTP is in order to use the internet.
Exactly.
The moment where adoption kicked in was where the experience stopped requiring you to know that. Because in the beginning of the internet, I remember that you needed to know technical things in order to use the internet. You just couldn't. You just couldn't use the internet without having that knowledge. So the adoption is only going to increase if we manage to reach the same experiences. And
yes, and it's interesting because now in the modern era, when we see the likes of blockchain and cryptography converge, everything changes, because it is imperative for those who are, wanting to learn more about the blockchain to understand that symbiotic relationship between the value of that blockchain in being performant enough to cater for the needs of the layer 2 or even the applications that are coming forth. So that, because these are tokenized assets as well, we need to know that that's happening. Now, in your case, the great thing is that again, the ability to move across is great to hear in terms of you're already progressing technologically in that agenda, but also the fact you're willing to do that. You're not just simply trying to stifle your own development by saying, no, I'm going to stick with this blockchain camp. That would be a red flag for many people who are listening, I think. So kudos to you for being aware of that and having the maturity as a company to recognize that. Now, in the roadmap, where are you positioned when we look at your current sort of stance in the marketplace? Because obviously it's competitive, the space is speculative in many respects, but when it comes to real utility, paint us a picture, Seb, of where you're at globally, from region to region. What are the stats, for example, with users?
Well, the one thing with the digitalization is that you're globally from the get-go. So we do have a regional advantage in Switzerland, just simply because of the network that we have here. I'm pretty sure that the first offline merchants or the not crypto native merchants are actually going to be in Switzerland, simply because we just know people here over the last. We have a lot of experience. So it means we know and knew a lot of people in Switzerland. So from a regional perspective, growing our product has happened a lot in Switzerland first for the big names.
And the laws support you, Seb, there as well, so well, with their progressive stance on blockchain. So has that helped you, do you think? And do you want to touch on that, like how the legal system there really catered to your needs?
We are totally glad that we were able to start something like this in Switzerland, because if you see a lot of regulatory scrutiny all around the globe when it comes to crypto. I'm just going to quickly mention Russia and India for very extreme opposite examples, which are still so far away from an acceptance perspective. I'm not saying from a doing perspective, because people there still, I'm in contact with some people living in India, and there's like, we're still going to continue using it no matter if they ban it. Like, you have those ban waves in India, and people are just like, it didn't
change much.
Stop us for using it. We should just go on still using it. A different topic. But then, we are very happy that we were able to launch in Switzerland, because the regulators here are like welcoming. Actually, like the jurisdiction that we are actually founded in, they actually allow you to pay your taxes in Bitcoin. Just to give you an example.
That's incredible.
They were like one of the first jurisdictions, I think, worldwide, that were allowing you to pay your taxes in Bitcoin. And not only, that's also something that actually amazed me. And funnily, we didn't make use of that here, even though we could have, just because we got to know about that very late, is that you can even found a company. Usually you need to back a company with assets, right? Typically that's cash or money. In the jurisdiction that we are in, since I think summer last year, you could actually found a company based with crypto asset as a backing.
Wow. So not just Bitcoin, but a crypto asset.
No, they started with mainly Bitcoin, but it's very, very unique to like the experience of founding a company. Like if you think about founding a company, typically you put cash into a bank, it's like a secured bank account in order to found the company. This entire process of founding a company in order to back it with assets is typically cash or bank driven, whereas jurisdictions started to allow that for crypto assets. And yeah, Bitcoin being the first of them. But
and that must be exciting for you because you are a payments protocol. And if we see more endorsement of things like Bitcoin, we know that almost in all developed regions of the world, they do regard somewhat Bitcoin to be some sort of utility definition, distinct from other designs, certainly not a security. So that's exciting to see that evolve. Now, because you're in Switzerland, again, great positioning. Europe, very supportive generally in most parts of the developments you are sort of touching upon. But are you concerned at all about any of the backlash from governments? If you start to really take away the market share of some of these legacy models where they uphold the integrity of modern business, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, could that happen, or do you think the opposite will?
I'm not afraid here in Switzerland. I mean, sure, banking here is big. Like classic payment processing here is big too, but it's a cultural thing. Like the culture here doesn't work the way it works in other countries when it comes to them being very protective about their power. That's why I'm not afraid here, like where we're located. But to give you an extreme other example, I am afraid at some point if things are going well to travel, for example, America. Like I not consider going travel there because the sector might just decide to lock you in and enforce a fine on you, and they're just not going to let you out before you pay that fine. Telegram being a perfect example of that. They're just going to lock you in.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's an example that's things that I'm afraid of, like traveling, but not here where we're located right now. I'm really not afraid of any regulatory.
Well, the exciting thing is you have that first mover advantage, and I don't think even enough people yet know of you, to be honest. So how do you garner more support? We know that typical strategies we've seen in 2017 was paying influencers doing whatever they could because everything was just moving at the beginning. But now we see all kinds of efforts to enable investment from various price moving supporters, or even just attention supporters through typical avenues of marketing. Now, you seem to be playing a much safer game because you haven't sort of dabbled in that kind of lower sort of standard of marketing. So what do you do? Is it a case of you let the tech talk, you let the utility talk, you let the products talk, or how do you be competitive and relevant?
I mean, we do that too. Like we let tech talk a lot, but that's not the only thing. We are totally marketing aware, or know that it's important. And you're totally right with what you described in regards of like influencers having been literally say the only marketing a lot of projects we're doing, which is very short term and in theory doesn't create long-term value for the economy that you're building, or the tribe that you're building, or the model that you're building. So we actually tap into it like that sphere too in the beginning. We actually now are convinced that we gonna continue with integrator driven marketing, because when you think about it, we are enabling other people, and those people that we are enabling often have a tribe already. Not only the websites, we usually have tribes and communities around them, but also just simply the fact that we enable so many different tokens to be a means of payment, in theory, reactivates every single token community. Because the fact that, they just made us a payment token by definition, you can now use token XYZ as a means of payment. And that would have never had happened. We would have never been listed on Coinbase Pro as a payment ever, our community, but we just enabled you. You can do that now. And that's something that we try to focus on when it comes to facilitate marketing opportunities. Those two facts. So activating those community around the integrators and the tokens that we just enabled them to become a payment token.
Well, you talked about a lot of different digital assets as well that are included in the offering. So do you want to touch on those? Because obviously the potential for payment could be far reaching in all many of the digital assets out there, because we still haven't distinguished clearly some of these as payment sort of supporting tokens in the very ambiguous term utility token as a classification. So what are the specifics right now, and will they grow? Will you have more payment related tokens come on board in your platform?
The reason that led to the amount of tokens that we're supporting right now is simply the fact that they are ERC20 standard. And we built that first because that's the most common standard on the Ethereum blockchains for tokenization. But there are other standards, and there's a constant evolution of new standards when it comes to tokenization of things. And we're totally aware of that. And from a mission perspective, or from a vision perspective, we really want to allow every crypto asset that is liquidatable to being able to be used when they use DePay. And let's drop the keyword. NFTs is a good example of that. It's also something that is on our roadmap. I mean, I'm personally, that's how I got into the space. Like, the first thing that I built on Ethereum was an NFT browser and an NFT exchange for Gods and Chains. So that's literally something that I have experience with, and you can be sure that that's going to be something that's going to be added to DePay very quickly. I also like this idea because it really goes with the vision. Like, one of our first public statements or public posts was I was sharing the video of Ready Player One. I'm not sure if you know the movie or the book.
Yeah,
and there's this.
It's awesome.
There is this scene where he just walks through the shop. It's right after he got this money from solving the first quest, and he just goes through the shop and it's like, I want to buy this and this and this and this, and let me tell you.
He was cashed up. He just loved it. Yeah, I remember.
And the experience was as simple as like just pointing at things, and everything else happened in the background, right? The transfer of money, the exchange of currencies potentially. So it's just like you just shop. That's literally and it's all this entire narrative of multiverses and tokenization and digitalization. That's literally
you're literally touching on the VR potentials that we're already seeing unfold as well. So it's all this conflation of exciting NFT VR potentials. It's great because they all relate to payment.
Yes, and we are like excited about this. That's totally how we envision the future, and it's like the future that we want to build. It's like literally driven by this.
Well, no wonder, Seb, that the DeFi community really are paying attention to you. Quite literally, I've seen that. I've been watching just all the attention from many of them, and I thought, why is this so prominent in this particular community? You mentioned that often there's tribes. Well, is it also because there's a lot of investors, or users or supporters? I mean, it just seems interesting that that's happened, because NFT doesn't just simply fit in with the DeFi narrative of Ethereum. The potential is going to expand right across, but you do have that the imagination's been captured by this camp, certainly right now. So, genuine reasoning behind that, is there a specific strategy you've used to really bolster the Ethereum community and reciprocally support their needs through your products?
I mean, not intentionally. Like, all the dynamics around how people get to know us and how we are spreading throughout the field is nothing that we intentionally do. I would even claim that you can't. You simply can't. You might try to drop a stone into the water somewhere, and it might create waves, it might not. So I wouldn't take credit for.
Got it. Well, it's great to see you getting that traction from that community, because it's huge. Now, because of the payment aspect in the products, and because of these waves of I guess, new experimentation, not just with NFTs, but social tokens, as you know, all these things are coming forward, especially in the DeFi camp. Do you think that you're going to be able to cater and keep up with all of these high demands, given that scaling is going to be really important as separate protocols to be included here?
That really depends not on the tokens itself, but about the standards that they're using. I mean, standards is something that you have seen being very important for the internet. If you ever dived into the history of the internet, the actual kickoff was when people finally agreed upon standards. Before you had like military networks, and every university had its own network. And then there was like this research project in the States, which was like, come on, like, can we like standardize that now? Because otherwise we will never be able to communicate together. And to answer that question, when the community or the economy, the crypto economy, sticks with standards, which so far they do. Like, there's not new standards coming out every week. Actually, they're totally aware of that they need to progress slowly in that field and really take a lot of research time, which is really good, especially on the Ethereum side. They really do a lot of research before they launch new standards, especially when it comes to tokenization. And the fact that it's still the case actually allows us to keep up with the new standards, because in the end, it's just about implementing those standards being eligible for decentralized swapping or liquidation, or however you want to call that, to use them as a means of payment.
Yeah, got it. Well, it's great to know, because at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that you are constantly keeping updated and competitive in this marketplace, and doing so in the way that you're building this and paying attention to these communities, to the needs that they're demanding for. And in this case, it's the social, it's NFTs, it's whatever is coming, to cater for these in the right context, in the right way. And most importantly, to make sure that everything around you is keeping up technologically. Now, I also wanted to ask you, like, with regard to the community combination with the technology, clearly that's exciting, but are there any other things that you found difficult in the context of trying to have this market moving position, lead this out? Because you were first, essentially, in many respects, were there problems that you came across that you didn't expect?
Well, I wouldn't describe the technical challenge of actually building something that hasn't been there before. Like, going from 0 to 1 is not something I find particularly difficult, but it has something to do with the fact that I have a lot of experience in building stuff. So while a lot of others might find that difficult, that wasn't something that the team or I particularly found difficult, because I'm like used to stuff from 0 to 1 intact.
Well, that's a good thing, Seb. If that's you just sort of ran with the flow and kept your devs, very active. But one of the things I was hoping you might mention is just the fact that the token economies are always, a challenging environment in and of themselves, when you see the anomaly of pressure from the outside. With regard to, that's tough to deal with. You don't expect that, I think, a lot of the times from
a dev.
Something
that I can tell you, which was very difficult, is to say no. That's very difficult. But saying no, because if you think about, again, if you pick on this standard procedure that we know for a lot of other projects, saying no, for example, to big investors is very difficult to do. Yes. Because they come with their own interest, and often it's a deal with the devil. And saying no to them, something that's very difficult. Especially
because they want preferential treatment most of the time too, Seb, and that's tough.
Exactly. Yes.
Thanks again for that transparency.
Especially in this sphere, it's kind of required, because how can you have a part that you actually want to hand over as public goods?
Well, as you know, it's exciting to 2021 now, because now we're starting to see efforts to decentralize the process of raising capital. Things are breaking down in ways we just haven't seen, and they're doing it really quickly with the experimentation of trust in a trustless environment with parties that aren't necessarily the big backers, but can contribute in some way. So that's exciting, I think. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the speculation aspect. You could never prepare for that, even in that move, whether you're a first mover or not. How do you cope with all this outward pressure from speculators who are saying more marketing, all these sort of almost outlandish demands that don't correlate with the logic behind the developments? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. It's just something that you get used to very quickly, because it's something that overwhelms you in the beginning, but it wears off, like I would say, after a month. After a month, you realize that those people that come in and push, they're also going to be gone in a week. They can just keep on moving between projects. So you actually start realizing that that's just like short-term thing. They're not 100%. Here for the long game. So you actually get used to this entire game, and you're just like, yeah, whatever.
And all it does is fluctuate prices for the short term anyway. And it just really creates capital for those who are in the know to capitalize on those short term swings. But it gives them a very bad reputation if some of those don't even make it, if they're relying solely on those hypes. So totally agree. Now, in your case, you're never going to stop that external, I guess, manipulation that does happen. But when it comes to the actual integrity of the utility token, this is where it gets really interesting, Seb. How does that token correlate longitudinally, not short term, and how does it reflect the integrity of all the products, all the services, all the infrastructure, so that the non-speculator, me, for example, as someone who's trying to understand the real value of this token long term, how can we discuss that without trying to talk about price appreciation, so we know there's some correlations for all of this to fit? Tough question, I know.
Yes. I think it's important to just quickly highlight the governance part of the token too, because a lot of token in the field, especially when it comes to protocols, often correlates to the governance.
Especially staking.
Yes. And we believe from also the pure utility functionality, at least in the first years, is mainly going to be driven by Pro. So the value that we create as a company, we literally hand over to the utility token part, like the token part or the utility part of the token, the value that we're creating from a utility perspective. While we build more and more Pro features, the utility part of the token, in theory, when it comes to defining a value, increases because people are willing to pay more for more features. It's that simple. So while we keep on building, that value is potentially going to increase over time too. And then in the long term, once the basics are around, the governance part is going to be very, very important when it comes to defining value for that token, because stuff is going to change in 3 to 4 years. That's something that Vitalik described also once, is that he finds it very important that teams keep control in the beginning, because you need to make decisions quickly in order to get stuff out there. But then once it is out there, you need to hand it over, because otherwise you turn centralized. No matter if you say no in the beginning, it's just the chances of it becoming centralized in the end is very likely when you succeed. It just happens naturally.
And that's why you always got to move away from the multi-sig models. Many of the techies, who are pro DeFi say that it's just it's not a panacea. It's only that interim sort of facility. The end goal is to really move away from those multi-sig scenarios into a more robust, genuine governance model that has several participants who are voting, contributing, staking. So in that sense, like, we're talking about the value add of the design and the architecture. There's two prongs, I suppose. There's your pro element, where you're building in a very core feature that's specifically designed to uplift the integrity and value of the token. And then you also have the model, the infrastructure for making sure that you can have the staking element. So once again, in that context, it's almost an oxymoron, isn't it? Where sometimes the staking can actually take away from the utility in terms of the use. So how do you sort of navigate that if a staking is moving away from interacting with this in a utility scenario?
But long term, I don't even see staking playing a big role anymore. It's really just like, if you think about it, usually governance leads to functionality, because the governance, true. A lot of current governance tokens, the only thing that they're doing is, let's open the staking pool. And then it's like, yay, we created the staking pool.
Right.
That's how currently see a lot of governance power being used. But something that we want to embrace long term is that governance, in the end, we need to have them do the decisions that they want at some point. And if you think about payment processing in the long run, the classic first example that you usually would think about is fees, like payment processing fees, because it's just a common thing. People are just used to that. It's nothing that we wanted to introduce as a team for reasons of adoption, because we think it creates additional barrier for adoption, because if people need to share the payments that they're processing with us, it's just an additional burden for them to, when it comes to considering us as a payment protocol to be put on their websites. And then long term, the governance in regards of the protocol can decide for whatever change they want to. And that's not only the fee aspect of it, but if you think about it long term, it's very visionary and long term, what I'm telling you now. But if you think about it from an efficiency perspective, The reason that we tapped into existing DEXs is simply because they have been around and was easy to integrate them. If you think about a technological efficiency perspective, if stuff move assets through your protocol, you don't necessarily want to go through other exchanges, in theory, from an efficiency perspective. So long term, the governance might even build up liquidity protocols or pools that are optimized for payment interactions, right? Because if you think about the design of Uniswap, for example, that had in mind trading. It's that simple. When they designed, yeah, exactly. But the entire technical revolution of automated market making is due to the fact that they literally tried to get this classic market making, as we know it from classic stock exchanges, to something that can be done in crypto. But that not necessarily suits payment swapping, because if you think about the legacy world, Forex is something that works totally different to classic trading. That's why potentially those protocol designs that we're currently facilitating might not be efficient long term. So if you think about the token utility very, very long term and the governance power, you could consider adding liquidity as a utility functionality of the protocol to the long term things that's going to happen to DePay.
Yeah, okay. So that's good to know, because if the long term, the real focus is fundamentally, as you explained, that utility, in use, interacting with this for products, that's the main thing we want to see, because if there's going to be a vast number of users apply this, that has to be the premise. So how do you onboard those, Seb? We talked about marketing, but often that's inner crypto. If you really want this to make this work, you've got to break those borders down with things that in products that, again, you mentioned, aren't blockchain centered. They're just simply there, seamless, ready, available, and known. So how do you do all that so you can scale?
Well, from an execution perspective, from a management and strategic perspective, the steps that we are planning to execute in order to get to get to the average merchant to consider to using us for accepting crypto payments is that, well, first we need to establish in the existing market. The existing market is, by the way, already big enough to grow to a point where you are profitable. That's also like a benefit for us. We don't have to start in crypto winter, where the market could be considered small, and you might never, even if you grow as crazy, you might not reach a profitable point.
Right.
And the current thing is that the market is big enough to, even in this market, grow to a point where you're profitable enough to pay the bills from a company perspective.
Okay.
And then,
sorry, go ahead.
When it comes to being able to convince the average Joe that runs a shop out there, or an internet shop, to consider us, is where we need to do all this work now to make it agnostic, getting to an experience where the payment, you don't need to know what is Ethereum. You don't need to know how different from Binance Smart Chain. You don't need to know, in theory, how to create wallets. So wallets is also important for us mid and long term in order to create that. And it's all about this experience. So once we arrive at that experience, it's the perfect go-to market for those people who are not naturally crypto.
Got it.
Until then, it might be a lot of wasted marketing.
And, it's interesting you say that, because some would argue, based on what you're saying, that maybe you could have launched, a little bit later when you had perhaps some other aspects of the design built in, so that you really had captured the users. You know how some are emerging now where they waited that little bit longer and they can actually evidence now users. Do you regret that you didn't, or do you think it was good that you launched earlier to capture the attention when you needed to?
I see it more from a product perspective.
Right.
There's this term in product development from a tech perspective, or tech product perspective, which is don't die in beauty. And that's something that I experienced myself in my professional career a lot. And that's something that I always try to avoid, is like to design this, work on this thing in your basement for 6 months or a year, and then you launch it. Is usually deemed to fail.
Right.
Because what you need to have is actual feedback, constant feedback loops with actual users. And when you keep stuff in your basement for too long, you literally lose
momentum,
connection to reality, because you're just in there building, and everybody is telling you, yeah, we do the right thing. Yeah, we do the right thing. And then you release it and it's like, it doesn't work for us.
Yeah.
Because you never got into this communication with the economy. And that's why we, from making decisions, we always want to release stuff early. And if you compare the crypto native people with the classic merchants, for example, they are so keen to give you feedback and get to help you for free how to improve things, that we actually want to, that has a lot of value. So why waiting?
Exactly. And, from what I'm going to sum this up, because obviously it's been lengthy, but one thing I've learned from you that's very clear is that you were bold enough to launch when the protocol was ready. So essentially, when you were at that point where you may not have had necessarily all of the users, but the reality is that was always the plan, to build more and more as you move forward. That was the logic, and will continue so forward for arguably decades. But the thing is that without those, you can't have the users. Secondly, on top of that, when you are bold enough to move in this realm, you aren't about trying to have all the hype and fanfare. You're just out there in the fair launch scenario, and you're just working through. So it's tough in this environment. You did the toughest thing you could do, and that is be legit. And I really mean that.
We have to deliver, but that's always how when I was thinking about the experience that I want to have throughout the journey, like my personal and the team's next 3-4 years, I wanted to be driven by the demand of delivering. That's also, you see that in our tokenomics with our demand insurance. We motivate ourselves. We are forced to be motivated simply by the experience that we created, by making the decisions that we made. And we made that on purpose, because what you also see a lot in the DeFi space, if you take Zushi as an example, it's just like, we copy pasted this protocol and I retire. It's like, that's not the experience that I wanted to create for myself, because I know that it eats your motivation. If you get put into this position where, you have a lot of assets at hand simply because you copy pasted a protocol and you kind of promise that you're going to improve it. And that's not the experience that I wanted to create for myself or the team, because I know it's not going to motivate you long term to continue working on it. It just doesn't.
And listening to this, if I'm thinking purely from the speculator, because we've got to respect the fact that exists, the exchanges are there, there's an exciting element for the speculator. Let's be real. And that is because in the context of you being bold to launch, you've fair launched, you've been building, improving this very clearly for anyone looks into the roadmap that you've achieved so far. Now that we've unpacked and explored the reality that the utility is going to be where the inherent value is of the token as you continue, that's when it gets interesting, because then people start to see, as this whole company builds and starts to prove itself in many of the different plans that you have and in many of the different products, that's when the speculator could go, okay, this potentially is more in the blue chip zone. That's the sense I'm getting from you. It's not this quick fix tomorrow, but it's something that has the huge market potential to be a real player, but one that's going at the pace it needs to build this properly. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
Totally. And that's on purpose, because that's how we wanted. That's why the tokenomics have been designed that way, to not get being put on the spot for a different experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So the integrity is built in right from the get-go to reflect. And well, Seb, we've gone on tangents, we've discussed all kinds of things, and I thought it might go that way. And that's because you simply come across as that legit actor in the space. I have to just say it, call it as I see it. You're someone who's not, there's no BS about you. Every time we talk, outside of the context of the interview, same sentiment I get is that you really do want to be here with your team. And if you also like to know more about the team, because we didn't talk about that, we did in the pre-interview, we're touching on that. You can see them actually in the website, click the right spot, and I'll put the links below if you want to have that transparency of the credentials. There's LinkedIn links for them all as well. And that's important because Seb is here showing us his face, his voice, his representation for the DePay team. Now, Seb, obviously, let's go back. So you are the DePay system, you are the tech, you are the technology and the services and products that's simply designed as payments solutions. You want to be the protocol and the suite of services that make it easy, seamless, 24/7, and most importantly, firing on blockchain in an agnostic way that makes you competitive at any time, anywhere, as you keep building. So, mate, I wish you all the very best. You are building with the best with the DeFi agenda right now, and you clearly aren't stopping. Is there anything you'd like to say as a summary for anything we may have missed to really let people know, from speculators to devs to really every participant in crypto, to pay attention to the blue chips, to pay attention to the real devs, because they need support as well?
Like, for the people that are listening, I just want to emphasize something that we also discussed outside of this interview, which is like, keep an eye on interoperability, like projects that do realize that we need to build the next layer, which is going to be interoperable, especially when it comes to interchains. Don't fall into this idea of that certain things are going to grow as much anymore in the long term. Because this interoperability is going to lead to this experience. And in the end, it's all about experience. It's for humans in general. Like, no matter if it's about actual physical products or digital products or protocols, it's always about what experience is that going to enable, because that's what people are chasing. That's what people are craving. It's what creates value for various reasons, and keep an eye on that. But it's very tough to see that coming. It's very tough because you need to have, in theory, you need to have experience, like with the internet, to count like 2 and 2 together, to see that last time this led to this, and it's very tough for the normal person to see that correlation.
But luckily we have you. You're the spokesperson for this, and you're telling us right now that is your core agenda, is that the UX UI is the imperative, that seamless interaction from the mainstream. Anyone, not a crypto savvy person. We're talking about people who want to utilize the services and products. By having that improving UX UI, you're going to improve everything about your whole company. And then on top of, underneath that, is that you're also willing to extrapolate, utilize, experiment, tinker with all these emerging blockchains. And that's the real point, with the interoperability, with the composability, with the interconnectedness of the two. We've seen that happen already with the Carla recently, with the EVM experimentation. It's happening. So right now you're progressive. You're really showcasing what can be done, and you're not afraid to stand up and say, hey guys, we are the real deal. We're going to take our time, but we're also going to make sure that we're relevant. We're a first mover. We're going to keep pushing for the future of how payments can be relevant utilizing blockchain. I think you're going to do it, mate. I honestly do. The proof will be, though, when we catch up next, because the real determiner will be, has the user experience improved? Are you garnering more users? Is this platform really starting to progress forward, especially in the context of the pro element of your products? I think you can do it, mate. I think we should book in again in a couple of months to let people know this is just one stop along a long roadmap ahead, and I'll be there all the way to do these free interviews to see this flourish, because we really do need more people in the space who are those long-term actors. So Seb, thank you very much for your time. DePay is one to know about. More links below. But until then, I wish you all the very best with your team, and keep going, mate. Keep building, keep representing the integrity of blockchain the way you do, and you will make it.
Thank you, Brad. Perfect closing words.
You're welcome, mate.